We have more on this, including Julian Assange's wife, but I wanted to give both of you an opportunity to weigh in.
Yeah, so this isn't about Assange the person. This is about principles that we have as a country or don't have. So the two, and I say that because, look, there's some things that Assange did later in his career that I didn't love, like offering $100,000 for information about stories that kind of incentivizes you to create that evidence, whether it actually exists or not. So I've got some like very specific bones to pick on issues like that. But this is not about any of that. This is about his earlier work, which was exemplary. And by the way, world changing. It's, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, exactly what journalism is supposed to be. So the two principles at hand here are freedom of speech and freedom of the press, right? As one, are supposed to be our First Amendment, and more importantly, how Assange has been outcast from the rest of the press. Like the government picked him off because he was easier. He didn't have a big brand. He didn't have a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So he wasn't the New York Times or CNN. So they go, oh, that guy. That guy's an independent journalist, so he won't get as much backing from the rest of the press and everybody else. And he caused the most amount of trouble because he's not playing ball. The rest of the mainstream press, relatively speaking, plays ball with the people who are powerful, gives us credit for always being right, and they write down our opinions as if it's true, and I can go on and on. But he didn't play ball, so we're gonna banish him, and in that way we intimidate the rest of the press, and we effectively take away freedom of the press, and we beat up an outsider, which the powerful love to do, right? And then the second issue is even broader, as John pointed out. It's that the rest of the world now is afraid, or certainly portions of their governments are afraid, and their people are afraid to send us any detainee, because whether it's about this issue or any issue, because we torture people and we do it regularly. And you think, oh, come on, really? Torture, that's a strong. Solitary confinement is definitely torture by all international law. Why? Because it drives you crazy, literally. It's not like, oh, metaphorically, kind of, oh, it was a little tough. I mean, even a limited period of time of solitary confinement, it causes significant mental issues, deterioration, etc. So they've studied it, there's no question about it. And we do it at a barbaric rate. I mean, the rest of the world is barely now waking up to, oh, America's kind of monstrous. It's like, in the old days, I was sending someone to Saudi Arabia, they're gonna chop off their arms and stuff, which by the way, they kind of do, right? And it's still the case, unfortunately, after all these years. But America, well, human rights and the United Nations and stuff. No, we torture people here. We did it under Cheney and Bush, that was illegal until then, and Obama afterwards said, it is now legal. Okay, I choose not to torture people, but it's not a crime anymore. So now people are very legitimately worried that yes, Assange will be tortured, and he'll be tortured for the crime of doing journalism. So that's the sick state of America today. Rayvana.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, right? Julian Assange is a journalist and a publisher who did journalism and publishing and is being prosecuted by the United States government for the crime of exposing their crimes and making them look bad, which is a big no-no apparently. But I also just want to point out that this is not like one party or the other. This is a bipartisan attack on journalism because it started under Obama, continued under the Trump administration, even though he had praised Julian Assange and sort of heavily indicated that there might be some sort of pardon for him, which never came. And it's being continued under the Biden administration. So it doesn't matter what party's in power, this attack on journalism, continues on.
And it's also amazing, like I understand, there's this thing in the media where people just make everything about everything else. And so I try to avoid that, but like they've been hounding him across the face of the earth for so many years. And I don't know, did Trump try to do a coup? I don't know, we have to get into his frame of mind. Did he believe that it was a coup? Did he believe that the stuff that, as Cenk pointed out too, if you are powerful, well-connected, if you are considered untouchable, you can do basically whatever you want. Stuff that is far more, objectively more damaging than anything that Julian Assange did. And, in the case of him, they're gonna be pursuing this If they don't get him this time, for decades, it will never end, and I don't understand it. In any event, I want to go to some video of Stella Assange, Julian Assange's wife, talking about this development.
This was always a possibility that Priti Patel would approve sending Julian to the country that has plotted to assassinate him, to the country that Julian exposed the crimes of. And we're not at the end of the road here. We're going to fight this. We're going to use every appeal avenue. And we're going to fight. I'm going to spend every waking hour fighting for Julian until he's free, until justice is served.
And the next steps in that path include the possibility, as I alluded to earlier, that Assange can appeal the decision at London's High Court. That would then have to give its approval for a challenge to proceed. Ultimately, it could reach the UK Supreme Court, but if it's refused, then he could be extradited within the next 28 days. And God only knows what the timeline would be like after that. But if he is found guilty in the end of all of the 17 Espionage Act charges that he's facing, originally brought by the Trump administration, he faces 175 years in prison, which that is just utter. There's a lot that comes up day to day in the news that just leaves you dumbfounded at the state of things. But that is absolute madness. Like, murderers don't face. I will never understand it. I don't understand the obsession. Whether you like him as an individual or not, and I think that there's plenty that he's done outside of his work that's just reprehensible as a leftist. Like, he was perfectly happy to help a fascist get elected as president of the United States, doing untold damage to so many vulnerable communities in the US. But this is about his work. It is madness that you could spend a year in prison, let alone close to 2 centuries, and that should not be controversial. I don't know why it is. I understand inside of the news media, as Cenk so perfectly put it, but for regular people, if they pay attention to this, and it won't get talked about much, so there's a good chance that they won't, nobody would understand why any of this works the way that it does.
Yeah, well, so that's going to get to my critique of the rest of the media in a second. But first, to double down on what Ravana was saying, so it's not just bipartisanship here in America. It's every government that's dealt with this, the UK, Sweden, etc. Whatever the American empire wants, the American empire receives. You would like us to turn over a journalist? Well, I mean, look, again, the Saudis chopped up Jamal Khashoggi, who was a journalist for the Washington Post. Yep. Instead, what we're threatening to end someone's life by putting them in prison for 175 years and maybe torture them for the rest of their lives. Okay, we're better, marginally. We shouldn't be marginally better than, by the way, our allies who are chopping up journalists, or our ally that murdered a journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, right? So, and then that gets to the rest of the press. What are you guys doing? I mean, you should, at the White House press conferences, you guys should be going nuts over Assange and Shireen, etc. Because that's killing journalists, that's imprisoning journalists for doing their jobs. But they don't view them as one of them. They view them as the dissenters. And punishing dissent is good, because then corporate media has even more power because they don't dissent. Then they get more access, and they're the only show in town, and they're a monopoly, and you better be inside the mob, because if you're not, well, you got no protection, you got no capos. Oh, you did great journalism, Assange, and exposed how awful the American government was acting. Well, maybe you shouldn't have done that, huh? Right? Where the hell are you guys? Bunch of frauds. Frauds, totally, utterly frauds. Okay, so back to the Trump, the fraud. You know, the person who threatened to assassinate him is Mike Pompeo, working for Donald Trump. They put together a memo about how should we murder Assange. That's after Trump was like, I don't know, maybe I give him a pardon. Meanwhile, he's like, well, go kill him, who cares? Just do a memo on how to kill and murder that guy. He helped you anyway, you idiot, right? But he doesn't care. He doesn't care about anybody, right?
There's no loyalty.
Yeah, of course not. So for God's sake, just let him go already. He's a journalist, let him go. And the fact that everybody isn't outraged by it shows you, no, they're not interested in challenging the powerful. They're interested in serving the powerful.
Yeah, and you brought up two things I wanted to talk about, Cenk, which was Shireen's murder and the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, because I think that it's like all of those two journalists and Julian Assange are emblematic of the Biden administration's attack on journalism, because Biden is planning a trip to Saudi Arabia next month to go beg MBS for more oil. This is the country that murdered Jamal Khashoggi brutally, violently. Murdered him, and there's no repercussions seemingly from America, despite the fact that Jamal Khashoggi was a WAPO reporter and an American citizen. The same goes for Shireen. Abby Martin, wonderful journalist, asked Anthony Blinken what the United States was going to do about it, and he pretended that there had been no, credible investigation. That's what he said. We don't know that it was the Israeli government that killed her, despite the fact that by that time CNN had published their investigation that showed that not only was she murdered by the IDF, that it was a targeted attack, that they targeted her to be murdered. So this is just a broad attack on journalism, and it is a scary time to be a journalist. When I say that, I don't mean an establishment media talking head, but like a real journalist who's uncovering actual crimes being committed globally.
Yeah, it's always a good time to be a news actor. The news actors never run out of work, right? But actual reporters, it's a very dangerous time. Yeah, Biden's a monster for what he's doing to Assange. I don't care what all you comfortable neo-libs in Washington think, oh, you can't call Biden a monster just because we're gonna go put a journalist in jail and maybe torture him. No, that's the problem, not me calling Biden a monster. No, but Assange is not in the elites. Biden is in the elites, and you're offending the elites. You're a very bad person. Do you agree with what Assange said about Trump? I don't care what Assange said about Trump. That's not the point of this. Can you concentrate? Do you have any principles? And the answer for the powerful is, as always, no. By the way, they've already ruined the guy's life. How many years has he spent now hiding from them? Whether it's in an embassy and now under detention. For God's sake, you've done enough damage, okay? Is it not enough? No, for the powerful, the biggest problem in the world is dissent.